I'm not a modeler. I pretend maybe to do a little bit of system engineering, but really, I'm a software engineer, right? And so I'm really going to talk about my journey of being introduced to model-based systems engineering. And so forgive me, so I've presented this presentation a couple other times, but usually it's to a software engineering audience, not a model-based system engineering audience. So I'm going to probably spend more time talking about what DevSecOps is, and then actually spend more time actually bring up the model. Because the model that we actually end up creating is actually publicly available. So you can actually go play with it later if you like. And so we'll talk about that. So I want to talk about what DevSecOps is, right? And it's kind of complicated, right? So does everyone know what DevSecOps, everyone heard the word DevSecOps? Because we're doing it, we're doing Agile, right? But what does that mean? Really, what does that mean, right? And so it really is, DevSecOps is really just a modern term for modern software engineering. They gave it a cool name, right? But it is an engineering practices bringing together multiple disciplines and lots of people, right? And usually when Civsy does it, you see this infinity diagram loop, right? I actually like this one better. One, I created, but the other part is right, it really represents the dichotomy of what they're trying to achieve, right? I'm trying to bring developers, security folks, and operations folks into this tightly integrated ecosystem that actually have different priorities and they have different concerns, right? A developer always wants to create new value. They want change. They want new features, right? Security, can I defend it? Is it defensible, right? In operations, they want stability. They want uptime. They don't like change, right? And so they're actually incentivized very differently, yet they're being asked to work and completely integrate together, right? At the same time, they're being squeezed by these triangles, right? Because they have to, understand the benefits of scope, cost, and time within the constraints of risk, benefit, and quality analysis, right? So they're being squeezed by these things, which is actually creating more conflict because they also have different interests, right? That is at the heart of what DevSecOps is. And oh, by the way, they throw in some automation to update your throughput and things of that nature. But it really is a socio-technical problem, right? And once I realized that, Natasha came along and said, I have the thing to solve your problem. It's called model-based systems engineering. And she kind of sucked me into the modeling world, right? And so from an enterprise perspective, they have three concerns, right? One is why do I exist? For whom am I serving, right? Whether it's a weapon system, it's a ship, whether it's someone buying a book on Amazon, right? All these places have a reason for existing. Then they also have two other things to think about. One is my ability to deliver value, and the other is the product that I'm selling or the service that I'm providing, right? And a lot of times, most organizations or product, when they do model-based engineering, I see they focus on the product, right? And maybe if you're doing manufacturing, you'll also focus on the manufacturing line and things of that nature. But from a software engineering world, they always focus on the product, and they always forget about the ability to deliver and build that product, right? From my perspective, that is the DevSecOps. That's that pipeline, right? That's all that software engineering stuff that has to come together to actually have a product that you can sell, right? And to do that, I found the two challenges. One is, how do I connect all that stuff, the process, the practices, and tools that are constantly changing, right? 3-4 years ago, AI wasn't a thing. Now I have AI generating code. How do I ensure the quality of this thing that hallucinates that's also writing my code, right? And how do I trust that, right? Well, that's process and practice and tools changing weekly, monthly, daily, right? How do I keep up with that? How do I understand that? And then how do I defend it from a cybersecurity perspective, right? And if I look at it from a traditional perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, I used to have my product and I build my moat around it. How do I defend my network, right? But then this DevSecOps thing came along and I compressed it all. I said, no, the developers and the operators, They're all going to kumbaya and work together, and we're going to connect them through automation digitally. And so I am going to take a multi-lane freeway, and I'm going to put it right over that moat and connect my developers and my operators and exponentially increase my attack vector, right? And if you've heard of SolarWinds, is famous in the news example where the adversary got into the pipeline, and then they rode that freeway into the products, right? And then you had all those problems, right? So how do I defend that? Well, it turns out that I have to answer this question before I get to go to this question, which made me do all the modeling, right? And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on two because Alex already stole my thunder with how do you do threat analysis of a model, right? Because that's what you would do. But I need to build the model first, right? And so I'm going to talk about building a DevSecOps model. And then, oh, by the way, it's more than just about the developers. There's a huge ecosystem when it comes to software development, right? You have the business people, you have, the sales people, you have the hardware people, because there's still some hardware in the software world. If nothing else, you have cloud providers, right? All that has to come together, and if they all aren't being agile, if they aren't all using an integrated approach to engineering, building, and maintaining the product, issues occur. And so it's all that to say it's a complicated system, right? And you can kind of go through this. It kind of goes to the argument on why DevSecOps is a socio-technical problem, which I think I've already proven with what I just talked about, right? It's a lot of people, process, tools, all coming together with technology. So how do you solve that? Well, one more thing is people like to build their pipelines, right? But they do it based on, I really like this tool. I really like this technique. I heard about this really cool thing, and I think that is the right way to do static code analysis. This is the way we should do configuration management. This is the way we do quality assurance, right? Well, they're playing whack-a-mole, right? And at the end, you get a pipeline, but does the pipeline actually meet my needs? Is it complete? Is it holistic? Is it meeting all of my information needs? Is it meeting all my stakeholder needs, right? That's all that complicated social technical stuff that people seem to not forget about, right? Because a lot of people, when they talk about DevSecOps, they talk about it from a developer's perspective, but they are just one stakeholder in the game that it takes to build a product. And so you can do a web search of DevSecOps or DevOps, whichever term you want, and usually what you find is one of two things: really high-level principles and concepts and the Agile Manifesto type of stuff, or you're going to get my product sells world hunger, right? This, pick your tool du jour, and they say, oh, I can do your whole pipeline for you. It does everything, perfect, right? Well, so as a consumer of a pipeline, as a developer, how do I pick which one? How do I get past the sales pitch and the social media stuff and actually say, no, this one actually meets my needs, right? The other part is there's lots of tools that are very configurable. How do I know what I want the tool to actually do? How do I know how I need to configure it to actually meet my capability, my operational needs? Because the tool could do a lot of stuff I don't actually want to do, right? And if I actually don't configure that out, I have to incur all the maintenance costs of people using the tool for stuff I don't actually want them to do, right? So how do I manage that? How do I figure that out? So I need more. I need to be able to bridge that gap between the theoretical stuff, Agile principles, DevSecOps principles, and hey, buy my tool, right? And that's really where we found MBSE would come in handy, right? How do I define what DevSecOps really is, right? So we do model bit, not your documentation-based approach, right? We've heard about that. This audience, I preach to the choir. And so what we decided to do is what we realized we need to do is we need to create a platform-independent model, right? Or a reference architecture, right? And so to really bring all these pieces together, which will allow someone to take a reference architecture and actually model and design their instance, pick which tools, which technologies actually meets their DevSecOps pipeline needs, right? To begin cracking the nut and answering these questions, that we see customer after customer struggling with, building a pipeline that actually meets their needs, right? that meets, and actually all these stakeholders have all these information needs. How do I answer their questions? And so what we did was, we went down the path of building a model, right? All these links, if you get the slides once they're released, it will actually take you to an interactive model. I'm going to be daring, and I'm going to go to the live model in front of a bunch of modelers. So, but I think this is an eye chart, so I don't think you might not be able to really see it, so I'm going to give it a shot. So our approach really started with the requirements, right? So we built the requirements. So we actually wrote over 200 shall statements of what a DevSecOps pipeline should be, right? And then from there, we went and said, okay, how would one implement this? How would you instantiate these 200 plus requirements, right? And that took us down, building that strategy, right? That's the next section, right? And then once you said, okay, and we came up with 10 capabilities, and I'll share them in a second. And then from there, what we did was we went to, okay, all those people, right? I kind of already said, it's more than just developers to build. What are all those actors? What are their responsibilities, right? And then the thing most people like to talk about when they talk about DevSecOps is they want to talk about the activities. We do coding here, we do testing here, we do, sprint planning here, right? So that's nice, those are those activities, right? But then how do I bring all these pieces together? How are they actually related, right? And so, but before we could do the relationships, we had to build the basics. So we went through and, wrote the requirements, wrote some capabilities, and begin mapping them together, right? And then once we did all of that, we finally could start thinking about the security piece, right? That threat modeling stuff that Alex talked about, right? And so that's kind of the journey we went down. And so the requirements, right? And so basic can be requirements, shall statements. We have traces linking them. Some requirements are duplicates of the others. Some requirements are derived from other requirements, right? We did all that in building our 200 plus some requirements. But the view I like, because this is 200 plus in that one view, is a lot of pink boxes, right? Which is great for building it, but for actually consuming it afterwards, I like the table. Right? And so in the table, right, it basically, a couple categories. One is governance. There's more governance requirements in DevSecOps than any other category, requirements, implementation, things of that nature. It actually has the largest section. But within it, right, we have the requirement. We have, basically a title. We have the shall statement. And then we have reference material. So this documentation we look at this as informative information. So some of them are blank, some of them have stuff in it, but the idea there is this shall statement is just a single shall statement. Will someone actually understand what we mean by that shall statement? Is there some more information we could provide to put clarity on the intent of that requirement, right? So it's not a requirement, but it's more clarifying information. So we put that in there. And I will get to it, but we also do relationships. So this is really, it's a lot. But these maturity levels, I'll talk about that later in the slide deck, but basically, we really struggled with, am I building DevSecOps for everything? Am I building a model for the novice, someone who's never done DevSecOps before? Because it's a lot, 200 plus requirements, it can be overwhelming. So how does one actually say, okay, where should I focus? All these capabilities. Where do I start? Where do I begin? Where am I currently in my journey of improving my pipeline? And so that's where the maturity levels came from. And then the other mappings here is mappings to which capability. Is it a configuration management capability? Is it a quality assurance capability? Is it an engineering capability or a project planning and tracking capability? So that goes into that strategy aspect. So we made all those connections. And so in this one, it just kind of shows you our 10 capabilities. Nothing really special about that. But so we said, okay, these are the 10. If I have all these capabilities, I have instantiated DevSecOps. This is the way in which you can do that, right? And we have definitions for each one of those capabilities. And we also define each one of those capabilities at the maturity level rating. What does configuration management look like at a level 1 versus a level 2? What is the natural progression of maturity one would expect as you mature your capability of configuration management, for example? So we've defined all that as well. But ultimately what we did is we took, that taxonomy and we mapped it to all the 200 plus requirements. So I can tell you which requirements or which requirements map to which capability and which capability satisfies which requirements, right? Because the reality is when you talk to a developer, configuration management, that's their repository, maybe their repo, right? But they don't really understand that capability when they pick or how they configure their repository has a whole bunch of shall statements that's implied that they're going to configure it to be able to meet your needs of doing good engineering. And so we've made those connections. And then what everyone loves is the activity diagrams, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them, but to give you an idea here, what we've noticed is that when most people talk about DevSecOps and we see most diagrams, they do it from what we call the product under development, right? They do it from the developer using the pipeline to build the product, right? And so you think about the infinity diagram, right? You go from planning to development to operations, right? But planning, I'm writing the code, right? These are activities, but there's a lot of details there, right? Just planning alone, right? I have all of these, plan for security, plan for design the product. I have a measurements program. How do I do backlog grooming? There's all these activities people are doing all the time, right? Who cares about which activity? Who needs to be informed by which activity? Well, when you do that, what that takes me to is the roles. And so that's just a developer's view. What people don't seem to understand is I also have the actual pipeline view, right? I have to actually plan the pipeline. I have to plan the tools. I have to plan that automation, right? It's actually a different set of activities than the activities that are so complicated, like you have planning, but their planning's different than what the planning of a software developer building the product, right? Where I care about both the capability and I care about the ability to deliver value and the product itself. They have slightly different activities you have to be concerned about to be successful, right? How do you define this? How do you understand those? And so we've captured both of those views. But then that gets me to the people. And so there's a lot more than just the engineers, right? The engineers is just this one section here. We also have business, and it's quite the word chart. But there's two key views here that I think is interesting. I'll click on both of them. What we did was, there's lots of different titles people use within an organization from a business perspective. So we created lots of different posts: business analyst, program manager, project manager, sales, supplier. But every organization is different. They use different titles, right? Ultimately, what we said was there is a critical role of business and mission domain expert. Like it can encompass all these other different titles depending on how big your organization is. But ultimately, what are their responsibilities, right? There's a lot of responsibilities here from a business perspective. But we also did that for, a user, release engineer, right? The worst one is probably the developer, which one would expect in the DevSecOps world. Site reliability engineer, software developer, right? Here's a software developer. It just keeps going and going and going and going, right? But we also had to do, when we got to the security piece, you'll see this is its own little node. Is it in here? No, my different diagram. There's a threat actor post, right? They're not part of my system, but when I get into the threat acting, I got to be able to put them into my model. So they're kind of over on the side, right? And the other view that I want to show is information needs, right? So from an architect, what are their goals in life? What are the key questions they need to understand to be a successful architect, right? About their pipeline. From a business perspective, what are those key questions that their information needs that they're constantly going to be asking throughout the entire life cycle of the project, right? And so we took the time to define them, mainly because we felt that those questions would provide the basis for a measurement program that one should always have, right? Because you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And so we took the time to do that as well in our model. Because once I did that, what I was able to do, and this is an eye chart no matter how I do it, but is I said, okay, for all those activities, all those blue diagrams with all those, like the planning, all those activities I showed you, right? What are the information needs of all those critical roles, right? Are they the approver, the contributor? Are they the one doing it? Are they just observing it? Like, what activities do they actually care about? And from what perspective, right? So basically we did a critical, role in a matrix. But this also starts feeding in, when you start building out and implementing your pipeline, who should be notified of which activities? Who should be invited to which activities, right? Really thinking, the entire social technical system, right? How do all these players come together? Because it's really where all the misconfigurations happen, where all the arguments happen, where, all the defect, all the technical debt comes from missing those communication elements. Because that's actually the hardest part of DevSecOps, is making sure the right people are informed and are keeping up the speed with this pipeline that's going faster and faster through your system, right? Because, pipelines are really focused on throughput, right? But how do I maintain the quality and all the other attributes of success? And then you can get to the threat modeling stuff, which I'm going to fly by because Alex did a fabulous job on. And so that was kind of what we did. Like, we built this thing, and what it enabled us to do as well is to evaluate programs. So that gives you the capability maturity, right? And so what's a maturity model? It's basically a set of characteristics, attributes, and indicators or patterns that one would expect for a particular domain. In this case, DevSecOps is the domain. You can build a maturity model for lots of different things. The Institute has been doing it for decades. But it can be useful to really start understanding, the evolution of that thing, right? How do I evolve my pipeline? How do I improve my pipeline? And so by being able to break down there's 200 plus requirements from, the 10 capabilities perspective, or from a life cycle, I can begin to understand how much it does, right? So out of my 200 plus requirements, like I said, governance represents 44% of the requirements. Why is that? Well, because software is a human-intensive thing. AI has not replaced us yet, right? So I have governance. There's a lot of governance. Because I need governance to get a bunch of people to work together effectively and efficiently, right? And then I have requirements, architecture, these other types of activities that one does to develop software. I can also map it out based on the 10 capabilities: configuration management, software assurance, quality, planning, and so forth. And that's kind of the distribution of the requirements. And then, like I said, we define the maturity levels holistically, but then at each one of these capability levels, I've also defined their levels. And it's all in the model, every bit of it, so you can go, and there's links there if you want to read those things. But now I can begin building profiles, right? I can go into an existing organization and do an assessment and go, hey, based on those 200 plus requirements, these are the ones that we found evidence of. We could occasionally see you're doing this, right? And so now we can start thinking about, okay, where's your pain point? Oh, our plans are always off. Well, you're not doing half the things one would expect to do good planning, right? These things happen. Configuration management. I once had a customer cold called the SCI for us to come out and help them get their act together. I think their captain, whatever, used a stronger word, but so we went. So, well, why'd you call us? It turned out they lost their source code. And they didn't realize they lost their source code until someone had an operational piece of software and they said, hey, I want you to change this software for me. And so someone took that executable, put it through a reverse engineering tool, and had to change that code, right? And this was, last decade or so. Like, configuration management's been like a best practice since like the 80s, right? And so these things still happen. When you don't take a holistic view of your system, your pipeline, things get missed, or things you take for granted come back to haunt you because you didn't have the right process, tools, or technique in place, or policy or governance in place to institutionalize that best practice, right? And so this is a way of starting to capture that. And then you can also like subsequently pick an area, improve that area, and reevaluate. So you can, you can move it up. It's just kind of the summary one. I actually prefer at the maturity level, right? So why would I, if I don't have a lot of green in level 1, I probably don't care about my reds in level 2 for any one of these categories, because I want the foundational stuff before I go straight to the other stuff, right? So this really allowed us to begin answering that question, how am I doing from this DevSecOps perspective? Am I doing it well? Am I doing it holistically? Am I meeting those needs from a qualitative perspective, right? And so that was really ultimately one of our goals, right? We had the goal of doing this, and we had the goal of being able to, do a threat assessment of a DevSecOps. Like, how do I avoid a SolarWinds type of scenario? That was kind of my journey. So it was kind of fast, but kind of give you it solved our problem, right? It defined what DevSecOps was. I'm open for questions or.
Hi, I'm curious if you had looked in your, I don't know, it sounds like you've done a lot of this over the last several decades, as you said, refining the DevSecOps process, but there are emerging pseudo standards, I would say. So like OWASP, they have the DevSecOps maturity model. I'm wondering if any of those played into the influence on this model that you're making.
Yeah, so I used some of them to derive some of the requirements. So there's a bibliography type of thing in the model too. So like IEEE's got a secure DevSecOps standard out, and there's a couple others. So I use them to pull out the requirements. The DoD CIO's office has a couple guidance on DevSecOps. And for those, I still go through them occasionally. Occasionally identify a missed requirement, missed capability. But what they're all missing is the interactions between them, right? So like, for example, the IEEE one, I'd have to go find the right title of it, right? It's a big document, extremely redundant, because it violates model-based system engineering. Model-based system engineering, you say it once, you reference it often. It keeps saying it over and over again in all different types of contexts and views to fill out their document. So it's just hard to consume and understand, really, what is it I have to do, right? And so I took that 100-page document, and it helped me derive those 200 requirements. Here's your shall statements, right? And so that's really often all the documents that I've seen, that's where they're falling short. They're building a document, not a model. And so I can't get just the information I need. And then it's not maintainable, because if I change it here, I got to change these other 22 pages versus have a model and then generate the views you need based on the truth, right? And so ultimately that is what's making this manageable and sustainable, where almost all of these documents I've seen, they write them once and then they become stagnant because they're so hard to maintain and release a new version.
Thank you, Tim.